he said, well, take up the saxophone. You'll always work with the saxophone. I said, no, I don't want to play the saxophone. I want to play the bass. So I managed to convince him to guarantee, because I was like 14, be the guarantor for the, what do you call it, layaway? Yeah. And then I paid for it by playing organ in church, and which I got $50 a year. A year. But they just covered the payments for the bass.
John Paul Jones was one of the most important musicians in Led Zeppelin, but his story is very different from what most people think. While his bandmates were famous for wild parties and crazy behavior, Jones lived a much quieter life. Now at 78 years old, he has shared some sad truths about what it was really like being in one of the world's biggest rock bands. When Led Zeppelin was at the height of their fame, John Paul Jones felt like an outsider in his own band. While Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and John Bonham were partying hard with drugs and alcohol, Jones stayed away from all of that. He was a family man who just wanted to go home to his wife and children after concerts. This made him feel very lonely and separated from his bandmates. The other band members lived such wild lives that Jones had to stay in different hotels just to get some peace. John Bonham, the drummer, was especially difficult to be around because he drank too much and caused problems everywhere they went. Jones often felt like he was working with strangers rather than friends. The band would only meet up for sound checks before shows and say goodbye right after performing. There was no friendship or hanging out together. The most painful moment for Jones happened in the 1990s, years after Led Zeppelin had broken up. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant decided to record a new version of a song called No Quarter without even telling Jones about it. This was especially hurtful because No Quarter was originally Jones's song. He wrote it and played the keyboard parts that made it special. When Page and Plant were asked about leaving Jones out, Plant made a mean joke saying Jones was probably parking cars somewhere. This comment really hurt Jones's feelings and showed how little respect his former bandmates had for him. Things got so bad that when Led Zeppelin was put into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, Jones made a sarcastic joke during his speech. He said, "Thank you for remembering my phone number," which was his way of showing how ignored he felt by the music world and even his own bandmates. John Paul Jones was born John Baldwin on January 3, 1946, in England. His parents were both musicians, so music was always part of his life. His father played piano and arranged music for big bands, while his mother was a singer and dancer. Jones started learning piano when he was just 5 years old, and by the time he was 10, his mother was teaching him to play the saxophone. When he turned 14, he picked up the bass guitar and started playing with local bands. Because his father worked as a musician, the family moved around a lot. This helped Jones learn about many different types of music, but it also meant he never really had a stable home or close friends growing up. He went to a good school where he studied music theory and learned how to arrange songs properly. This education would later help him become one of the best bass players and arrangers in rock music. Before joining Led Zeppelin, Jones worked as what's called a session musician. This means he played music for other artists' recordings without being a permanent member of their bands. He was very good at playing many different instruments: bass guitar, keyboards, and even regular guitar. This made him very popular with recording studios because he could do many different jobs. During the 1960s, Jones played on recordings for some very famous artists like the Rolling Stones, Jeff Beck, and Dusty Springfield. He also worked as a musical director for television shows. In 1964, he even released his own song called Baja under the name John Paul Jones, which is the name he kept for the rest of his career. In 1968, Jimmy Page was looking for musicians to form a new band. He had already found Robert Plant as the singer and John Bonham as the drummer, but he needed a bass player. Page knew about Jones from his session work and asked him to join. This is how Led Zeppelin was born. The band became incredibly successful very quickly. Songs like Stairway to Heaven, Whole Lotta Love, and Kashmir made them one of the most famous rock bands in the world. Jones's bass playing and keyboard skills were a huge part of what made Led Zeppelin's music so special. He could play complex bass lines that most other musicians couldn't even understand, and his keyboard work added beautiful layers to their songs. But success came with big problems. The constant touring was exhausting for everyone. but especially hard for Jones because he missed his family so much. While the other band members seemed to enjoy the crazy rock star lifestyle, Jones just wanted to be home with his wife and children. He often felt like he was the only adult in the band, trying to keep everything together while his bandmates acted wild and irresponsible. Jones brought a lot of different musical ideas to Led Zeppelin. He wanted to include parts from classical music, jazz, and folk music in their rock songs. This made their music more interesting and complex, but it also caused arguments with the other band members. Jimmy Page usually wanted to keep things more simple and focused on heavy rock sounds, while Jones pushed for more complicated arrangements. These creative differences led to tension during recording sessions, especially when they were making albums like Houses of the Holy and Physical Graffiti. Jones would suggest adding orchestral instruments or complex keyboard parts, but Page wanted to stick with straightforward rock music. Sometimes these arguments helped create amazing music, but they also made the band members frustrated with each other. By the late 1970s, the problems in Led Zeppelin were getting worse. John Bonham was drinking heavily and using drugs, which made him unreliable and difficult to work with. During the recording of their album, In Through the Outdoor, Bonham and Page were often too drunk or high to show up to recording sessions. This meant that Jones and Plant had to do most of the work themselves, which created a very different sound from their earlier albums. The other band members didn't like this change, and it caused even more arguments. Jones felt like he was doing all the work while getting none of the credit. He was writing songs, arranging the music, and basically keeping the band together, but Page and Bonham were still seen as the stars of Led Zeppelin. The touring life was brutal for all of them. They had to perform almost every night in different cities, traveling thousands of miles and dealing with screaming fans everywhere they went. John Bonham especially hated this lifestyle and often talked about quitting the band. He missed his family and was tired of the constant pressure. The band's manager had to bribe him with expensive gifts like sports cars just to keep him from leaving. Jones later said that the band members were never really friends. They worked together professionally, but as soon as they finished touring or recording, they would go their separate ways and not talk to each other. Jones thought this actually helped the band stay together longer because they didn't have personal drama from spending too much time together, but it also meant he felt very isolated and lonely. The different lifestyles of the band members made everything worse. Page and Bonham liked to stay up all night partying and then sleep all day, while Plant and Jones preferred to work during normal hours and get enough sleep. This meant they were rarely all together at the same time, and it was hard to get anything done. Jones described it as being like ships passing in the night. They would barely see each other, even though they were supposed to be working together. The tension between Robert Plant and Jimmy Page also made Jones's life difficult. Plant was dealing with personal tragedies, including the death of his young son and a serious car accident that injured his family. He was frustrated with Page's increasing drug use and erratic behavior. Page, meanwhile, was struggling with his own addiction problems and was having trouble being creative. Jones often found himself trying to be the peacemaker between them, which was exhausting and stressful. Everything came to a tragic end in 1980 when John Bonham died from alcohol poisoning. The remaining band members decided they couldn't continue as Led Zeppelin without him, so they officially broke up the band. For Jones, this was probably both sad and a relief. He had lost a colleague, but he was also free from the dysfunction and unhappiness that had taken over the band. After Led Zeppelin ended, Jones had to figure out what to do with his life. He continued working in music, but in very different ways. He became a producer and arranger for other artists, working with bands like Heart, Lenny Kravitz, and many others. He used his skills to help other musicians create better music, and this work was often more satisfying than his time in Led Zeppelin because he could work with people who treated him with respect. In 1999, Jones released his first solo album called Zuma. This was his chance to show what he could do when he had complete creative control. The album mixed rock, jazz, and classical music in ways that showed off his incredible skills as both a bass player and a composer. Music critics loved it and said it proved that Jones was much more talented than most people realized. He followed this with another album called The Thunder Thief in 2001, which continued to explore different types of music. These solo albums gave Jones the artistic freedom he had always wanted, but he never had in Led Zeppelin. He could experiment with any sounds he wanted without having to argue with bandmates about it. One of Jones's most successful projects after Led Zeppelin was forming a band called Them Crooked Vultures in 2009. He worked with Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters and Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age. This band was different because all three members treated each other as equals and respected each other's ideas. Their album was very successful, and Jones finally got to experience what it was like to be in a band where everyone got along and supported each other. Throughout his career after Led Zeppelin, Jones has worked with many different artists and has shown that he can play almost any style of music. He has also composed music for movies and television shows, proving that his talents go far beyond just rock music. Many younger musicians look up to him and try to learn from his techniques and musical knowledge. In his personal life, Jones has been much happier than he was during his Led Zeppelin days. He married his wife Maureen in 1967, and they are still together today. This is very unusual for rock stars, who often have multiple marriages and divorces. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 2015, which shows how different Jones's life has been from the typical rock star lifestyle. Jones and Maureen have 3 daughters together. Jacinda became an actress, Kira became a teacher, and Tamara became a graphic designer. Jones has always been very proud of his daughters and has tried to be a good father despite his busy career. He has said that his family was always more important to him than fame or money. The fact that Jones was able to maintain a stable marriage and raise successful children while being in one of the world's biggest rock bands shows his character and values. While his bandmates were getting into trouble with drugs, alcohol, and multiple relationships, Jones stayed committed to his family. This probably saved his life and his sanity, but it also made him feel even more isolated from his bandmates. One of the saddest parts of Jones's story is how little recognition he has gotten compared to the other members of Led Zeppelin. Most people know the names Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and John Bonham, but many don't know much about John Paul Jones. This is unfair because he was just as important to the band's success. His bass playing and keyboard work were essential to Led Zeppelin's sound, and he often wrote or arranged the music that made their songs so special. There's a famous story that shows how Jones feels about music quality. In 1987, he went to see the band Metallica perform in London. When someone asked him what he thought of their show, he just shook his head and said, "That's it." This shows that Jones has very high standards for music and isn't impressed by bands just because they're popular or loud. Even though Jones is now 78 years old, he's still active in music. He continues to work with different artists and is always looking for new ways to create and express himself through music. He also spends time teaching and mentoring young musicians, sharing the knowledge and experience he has gained over his long career. Jones has also been involved in charity work and special concerts to help various causes. He often surprises audiences by showing up to perform at events where people don't expect to see him. These performances remind people of how incredibly talented he is and how much music means to him. Looking back at his time in Led Zeppelin, Jones has mixed feelings. He's proud of the music they created and knows that it has influenced millions of people around the world. Songs like Stairway to Heaven and Kashmir will probably be remembered forever, and he played a huge part in making them great. But he's also sad about how lonely and difficult that time was for him personally. The story of John Paul Jones shows that fame and success don't always bring happiness. Even though he was in one of the most successful bands in history, he often felt isolated, unappreciated, and disconnected from his bandmates. His experience reminds us that the people we see on stage or in the media are real human beings with feelings, families, and struggles just like everyone else. Jones's story also shows the importance of staying true to your values even when it's difficult. He could have joined in with the wild behavior of his bandmates, but he chose to stay committed to his family and his principles. This decision probably cost him some friendships and made his time in the band harder, but it also allowed him to have a long, healthy life and career that has continued long after Led Zeppelin ended. Today, John Paul Jones is recognized as one of the greatest bass players and most versatile musicians in rock history. His influence can be heard in countless bands and musicians who came after Led Zeppelin. While his time in the band was often painful and lonely, his musical contributions will be remembered and appreciated forever. At 78, he can look back on a career that, despite its challenges, has enriched the lives of millions of music fans around the world.